Thank you. I'd like to first begin by saying that I'm grateful for the invitation to have been brought to Birmingham. And since the focus is on the Arab Spring, I will begin my observations by saying that I want to address the question which I'm often asked as a Palestinian: when is it going to be spring in your part of the world? Or the question, have you had a spring yet, or are you going to have one? And I'd like to say a couple of things with regard to this question about Palestine. Now, the first is that it very much depends on what one means by the question, are you going to have an Arab Spring in Palestine? What does it mean? Depends on what one understands by what happens or what happened in the Arab world. Now, in my own understanding, and of course I'm here to learn, and I hope by the end of the day I maybe will have changed my mind about what I'm about to say, but in my understanding, the real kernel, the heart of the Arab Spring, as I understand it, is the realization, it seems, that swept across the Arab world, the realization by the people that they are sovereign, that the people are sovereign, that it is the people who hold the power in their hand, that it is the people who can change the political order in which they live. Now, of course, there are various other layers of what happened, of what the meaning or significance of what happened are. But I think that what I just said, to me, from my perspective, constitutes the heart or the significance of the message of the spring, that the people are sovereign. Now, having said that, if I'm not mistaken, then transferring the situation to my own country, I'd say that then we're not going to expect a spring in that sense. The reason being that from the Palestinian perspective, and in the Palestinian history and in the Palestinian experience, the people have for a long time actually felt they were sovereign. And that's a very important, I think, difference or distinction between the situation in or among Palestinians and the situation in the rest of the Arab world. Now, by saying this, what I mean is the following: that in particular in the Palestinian community, among the Palestinians, for various reasons over the course of their short history, 50, 60, 70 years, we, the people, have always felt it was necessary, important for us to take our own matters into our own hands. And this happened right from the very beginning, if you remember, of the problem of the conflict with Israel. And it's actually developed, and it's continued to develop, and it continues till this day. So in the context in particular, I want to just go across very quickly, because I don't want to talk about our experience in Lebanon or other places, or even within Israel, but let me focus on the West Bank, Gaza. I'd say that in particular also in the past 40 years of occupation, 43 years, the Palestinians have very much been a master of their own destiny, to the extent that that's possible, and it's not been possible actually to be a master in the fullest sense of the word, in doing the things that they did. And I will cite examples such as the intifadas that we've been through, whether the first one or the second one or the earlier ones or the later ones. We are, the Palestinians, in a constant state of struggle, because we believe ultimately that it is we that can change our destiny. And I think it is what the Arabs have felt in the rest of the Arab world recently, that in fact has been the heart, as I say, of the Arab Spring. Therefore, I don't expect anything dramatic by way of spring to happen in Palestine in the forthcoming period. Now, the second reason why I don't think anything will happen is that, again, unlike the situation in the Arab world, our political order is complex in the sense that there are two layers. There is the immediate layer, which is the layer of our own leaderships, whether in Palestine, in the West Bank, or in Gaza. But then there is the real layer, which is the umbrella layer, which is the occupation. Now, in the Arab world, this is not the case. And when the people in the Arab world engage in changing the political order they live in, they can immediately do this because there's only one visible layer anyway. Maybe there's an occupation that's invisible, but there's one visible leadership anyway. In our case, we know, the Palestinian people know, that whether we're talking about the leadership in the West Bank or the leadership in Gaza, it doesn't really make very much sense for us to stage an uprising against them, because in any case we realize that they do not have any power. That if Abu Mazen, for example, wishes to travel from point A to point B, whether this point B is inside the territories of occupied or outside, but he has to go and apply for a permit from the occupier. The occupier is Israel. So nothing that the Palestinian Authority can do, it can actually do freely. And we know this, the people know this. And as an example, I don't know how much, I'm sure that you, all of you are probably well aware of this, but as an example, recently when the Israelis were upset with the fact that Abu Mazen wanted to go and address the United Nations and apply there to become recognized as a state, he was reduced, I mean his permit was reduced from I don't know how many months they usually give it for, to a much shorter period. So Abu Mazen does not have power. Our members of parliament who are elected in Gaza and in the West Bank are mostly either in jail or under some kind of house arrest, or unable in any case to communicate with one another. And as you know, the members of parliament are sometimes, they either belong to the Muslim Brother group that won many of the seats in our legislative authority, and some others belonging to Fatah. But whether it is Fatah members, and I cite for instance Marwan Barghouti, one of the most popular Fatah leaders in the occupied territories. So whether it is someone like Marwan Barghouti, or it is members of the Muslim Brothers who have been elected by the people in the elections 4 years ago, they are lying in jail, serving very long-term sentences. You also heard recently probably about the person who went through a 63-day hunger strike from the jihad. He lives in a village which supposedly is under Palestinian Authority control, but the Israeli army, as it is its nature to do, went into his village, his town, and picked him up and applied the administrative order, military order of administrative arrest, which is why he in fact went on hunger strike. Now this administrative, by the way, military order arrest is one of the things we inherited from the British Mandate, which is to be arrested without trial and to be held without trial. In fact, you probably may know that more than 500,000 cases, probably even perhaps more by now, of such cases of arrest have been made against Palestinians left, right and center since the beginning of occupation in 1967. These arrests are arrests of people that are taken, they're not interrogated, they're not charged, they're just thrown into jail, and they can be renewed 3 months, 6 months. Some people have had them renewed for about several years, and it was a perfect way for the Israelis to control the people over the past, or to control or intimidate the people over the past 43 years. Now the point is this, that this man for the first time decided that, and maybe in this sense you can say this is an example, an embodiment of the meaning of the Arab Spring. This man, for the first time after 1.5 million cases of arrest of military orders, decided, it is not right that I should be put under this order in jail, and that I should be allowed to, it's not right that the Israelis should come in and take me and arrest me. And so he went on this hunger strike, and he succeeded. And now all the prisoners in jail who are under administrative detest are considering for the first time the idea that they will not resort to military courts to try and get themselves out of jail, because over the years everybody that's been taken to jails have been actually resorting to Israeli courts in order to get themselves out, as a way to get out. But after this particular incident, now the prisoners are thinking that they might not do this. Okay. So in general then, these are just examples. I'm just saying that the Palestinians do not actually feel that they live under the control or power of an authority that has any real power over their lives in the form of their respective leaderships in Gaza or in the West Bank. People know that the real leadership or the real power in control of their lives is the occupation. Now, just a few examples. When Oslo was signed, and since then, as you know probably, the Palestinian Authority is in control so far maybe of only 20% of the land that was occupied in 1967. The Israelis, in the meantime, are in control in terms of actual wall and in terms of actual settlements of another 20%. And the larger part of the territory, which they call Area C, is in any case also controlled by Israel, but although it is not inhabited. So the 20% that the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank owns or controls is the population centers, the Arab population centers. The other 20% are the areas that the Israelis have taken over by building up the wall and by installing their settlements. And therefore, we live in a situation in which it's very much clear to us that we're not actually, we do not really have proper control or proper functions in our own territory. Okay, so what do? We started out by going for a two-state solution, and there's a long debate, as you know, within the Palestinian community about what this was about, whether we should go and do it. There were, people for and people against, and the two-state solution involved making many compromises, at least in theory, that in order to reach such a solution we have to make compromises, whether on territory or on various principles. But in general, in fact, ever since we engaged in proper negotiations with the Israelis in order to arrive at such a solution, we have come to feel less and less capable of arriving there because of various things, including mostly the obstacle being created by the ongoing takeover of the lands by the Israelis. I mentioned the territory, 20%, but if you think of the demography, it's also mind-boggling, because from 1967 onwards, and we go to 67 because that's the that's the line that was supposed to be the line dividing possibly an Israeli state from a Palestinian state. From 1967 onwards, the number of Israelis that have come to live on the potentially Palestinian side of that line has grown from none, to 500,000 people. 500,000 people. Half of 500,000 people actually live in and around Jerusalem, and the other half of the 500,000 people live scattered in various settlements in the rest of the West Bank. Now, the 500,000 people that live in Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem, make it very difficult for the most imaginative and most compromising of Palestinians, I refer also to myself here, to actually dream or set up a design in which Jerusalem can be shared as a capital both of an Israeli state and of a Palestinian state. It's extremely hard. And as I said once to a group of journalists that came to visit me in my office in East Jerusalem recently, in East Jerusalem, I told the journalist, if you look due, I told him that East Jerusalem, the term has become a misnomer. And he said, why? I told him, because now you are sitting in my office in East Jerusalem, but if you look out of the window towards the east, further east, you will find that you in fact are looking at an enormous new Israeli settlement, which is Pisgad Zev, which is part of West Jerusalem, because it's the extension of the Jewish part of Jerusalem. And if you look out, I told him, west, due west, you will see there on a hill an extension of this place we're sitting in, Beit Hanina, which is an Arab suburb, if you like, or village, that used to be part of Jerusalem, but that now has been cut off of Jerusalem by the wall that the Israelis have built. So you look at the west, and you find it's not East Jerusalem anymore, and you look at the east, and it's again not Jerusalem anymore. Both sides are belie the name that this is East Jerusalem. By the way, just very quickly, I want to say that even the term occupation, I'm beginning to personally get a little bit annoyed with, because I sort of it seems to me that the only way, I realize it's important from a legal perspective and so on, but if you think about it, the only times normally that you come across the word occupied, where do you normally come across the term occupied? Most often in your daily lives. Toilet. And normally, it says occupied in the toilet, and you hang around for a minute or two, perhaps 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then the guy gets up and leaves, and you go in afterwards and you don't find any settlements. But the term occupied has lost its meaning, is what I'm saying. So we began with terms, we began with paradigms 40 years ago. The 67 line, the green line, is one such paradigm. And the 67 line, as a paradigm, was actually one that was held onto by a lot of Israelis, liberal Israelis and progressive Israelis that have have called for the establishment of peace with the Palestinians. But this particular paradigm has become meaningless, as some Israeli writers are now saying. There's somebody that's coming out with a book, I can't remember his name, for the moment escapes me, but the book is being published soon, that I looked at recently, in which this particular writer, who does not come from the left-wing progressive party within Israel, actually criticizes the left-wing groups in Israel for sticking to what he called a non-existent paradigm, which is the green line or the 1967 line. He basically said, this writer was claiming, and I would claim the same, that that holding on to the green line as a paradigm no longer makes any sense if you want to make peace. Why? Because of the various things we've just said, including the fact that there's so many Israelis actually living across this line. 500,000 people is a large chunk, maybe about 20% of the whole population of the West Bank in particular. So what does one do in this kind of situation? So more and more people are getting fed up. As you know, Abu Mazen went to the United Nations. He is also engaged in trying to re-establish dialogue with the leadership of Hamas in Gaza, or with the leadership of Hamas in Syria, or with the leadership of Hamas in wherever. But he will get to establishing the dialogue that's needed with the people in Gaza, I hope. We hope this will happen. But imagine when it happens, and once it happens, how much more difficult it's going to be for us to push ahead with the so-called peace process or the negotiations. Because if even now, without the unity between Fatah and Hamas, we can't really get anywhere with the Israelis, what is going to happen when Hamas and Fatah get together and stand up to the Israelis and say, these are our conditions. Clearly the Israelis are going to be even less interested in making peace with us on those bases. So I don't actually expect, therefore, that there will be much progress forward in the existing negotiations for a two-state settlement. I stand to be corrected, and if tomorrow suddenly we hear that there is a two-state settlement around the corner, I'd be extremely happy, and I would go out and have a holiday, but I doubt very much that it will happen. And I think therefore now it is incumbent on all of us who are beginning to see the landscape, the political landscape, in the way that I've described, to try and begin to think of new ideas. Because it's either one or the other. Either we allow things simply to run their course, and their course seems to be running along the path towards a dead end. And a dead end means basically not necessarily a third world war or a nuclear war, but it's going to be a very difficult life for both Israelis and Palestinians as we come closer and closer to that dead end, as it will become clearer and clearer to both sides that a peace agreement on the basis of two states isn't going to be possible. There's going to be obviously more difficult conditions, and therefore there's a problem of leaving ourselves to roll along in this direction. Otherwise, we have to come up with new ideas, and I have a couple of minutes. I'll just say one or two things about the possibility of perhaps going towards not quite back to the one-state solution, which is what the Palestinians and some of the Israelis right at the very beginning thought about, but to a kind of federal system of Palestinians and Israelis. I think two principles have to be upheld if we go in that direction, and I would say that those principles would be the principles of freedom and equality. And I believe if we manage to come up with an agreement on what kind of end game we have in mind for such a federation, I think in that case we should come back and devise a parallel roadmap in order to get there. And one thing that can be done in order to get there as part of this roadmap, I believe, is to start giving back some basic civil rights to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. So the rights of movement, free work, and so on and so forth, alongside and parallel with increasing the support that is given to the PA, so that at one point we do come up with some possible kind of peace plan for this kind of thing. Now, I don't have much more time. I can perhaps address some of the questions later, but I want to just to cite, going back again to the 47-48 United Nations resolution concerning partition, that if you remember, the special committee that was set up at that time was set up of, I think it was 11 members, and the report that they came back with was to go ahead with partition, but there were 3 countries at the time which dissented and which had reservations, and they sort of, their argument was that it's bad to come up with a partition for the Palestinians and Israelis. It is better to go for some kind of federation, and they wrote up a report. It is called the Minority Report, and if you go back and look at the history, you will find the Minority Report was led by India, and India at the time, if you remember, was led by Nehru. And Nehru at the time was, if you remember again, and India behind Nehru, in fact, including great thinkers in India like Gandhi, and before Gandhi, Tagore, the great poet, were already thinking that we should go for some kind of federation, the same like they wanted for India, because they were against the partition of India at that time also. So they were also pushing for some kind of condominium for the Palestinians and Jews within Israel-Palestine. So I think back to the Minority Report and then the future. Thank you.